just piggybacking on that last segment regarding Bernie Sanders' speech about democratic socialism, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a breakdown into the people that are like criticizing, I guess, Bernie Sanders, and the people that are like, basically don't agree with him on democratic socialism, think he's a socialist, think he's too far left, think he's all those things. So this is an article from The Atlantic, and it's written by a guy that's honestly, he's smeared Bernie Sanders with articles, multiple different kinds of articles in the past. I don't know if this is a smear, more of a smear piece, but this guy his name is Edward Isaac Dover. He was writing for Politico not that long ago, and he was just smearing the shit out of Bernie. This was like a year ago or so. And so I don't know, now I guess he works for The Atlantic, and he's writing an article about how, I guess you could kind of perceive this as a smear piece too, because it's basically talking about people that are attacking him. So anyway, the title of this article is, "As Bernie Sanders leans into socialism, his rivals laugh." The subheadline says, "The longtime independent senator is preparing to deliver a speech in which he will reiterate his support for the boogeyman du jour." So this is obviously from before he gave his speech, and this one is just kind of like, I guess, the preamble to all that, and then people kind of giving their comments before he makes the speech. So it says, "Making Elizabeth Warren laugh can be tricky. Throwing her off her talking points is almost impossible. Both happened when she heard that her 2020 opponent, Bernie Sanders, is scheduled to deliver a, quote, major address today titled, according to his campaign, 'How Democratic Socialism is the Only Way to Defeat Oligarchy and Authoritarianism.'" It says, "The Massachusetts senator shook her head. It was Sunday evening, and we were standing in the backyard of a house on the poorer side of town here. Warren had just explained how her proposed 2% tax on every dollar over 50 million, 2 cents, she likes to shout, would provide enough cash to fund universal child care for every child up to age 5 and universal pre-K for every child over 3. Damn, $50 million? Jeez, you couldn't go any lower? Anyway, it says, "The plan," Warren said, as she has many times, "will also raise wages for teachers and child care workers, with enough money left over to wipe out almost all existing student debt." Almost all? So how about not all? It says, Warren refers to her agenda as a broad structural change. It includes proposals such as securing voting rights for people of color and students, ending partisan gerrymandering, and amending the Constitution to stop the free flow of money in politics enabled by the Supreme Court's 2010 Citizens United decision. Warren believes the bold structural change she's calling for is what's needed, and that there is a difference between that and Sanders' vision of democratic socialism. It's interesting that Elizabeth Warren is coming out against Citizens United. Not to say that she hasn't before, but it's interesting that how she's coming out against it when she actually gave an interview on the Young Turks not too long ago, where she said that she would not be taking corporate funding during the primary, but she would be taking corporate funding during the general election if she were the nominee. So going up against Trump, she's happily taking corporate funding, but not in the primary. So that's pretty convenient, considering how she's going against Citizens United, but she's willing to take advantage of Citizens United, the Citizens United ruling of allowing corporate money in elections. She's willing to take advantage of it during the general, but not the primary. Very convenient and centrist of Elizabeth Warren, but okay. It says here, she's quoting her in this article, says, "I'll have to hear the speech," she said diplomatically, "of her rival's coming address. But what about the argument of the title to insist on democratic socialism?" I asked. She says, "I'll have to hear his speech," she said again. That Sanders would lean into democratic socialism and that he'd do so now is surprising only to people who don't know him. He wants this fight. He believes that he's more right than most insiders are ready to acknowledge, based on his own successes and based on how he's defined so much of the larger Democratic agenda these past 4 years, not to mention all of the polls. That shows, all of the polls that show support among young people for socialism. Of the 24 Democrats running for president, some are ready to sign on to ideas Sanders has pioneered, such as Medicare-For-All, but none agree with democratic socialism as a way to govern, or as a pitch that will defeat President Donald Trump. Former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, who was booed for condemning socialism 2 weeks ago in a speech before the California Democratic Party, laughed at the title of Sanders' speech when I read it to him. Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado let out an exasperated chuckle, quote, "I don't think the American people even know what that means," he told me. "Nobody in my town halls talks about democratic socialism versus oligarchy and authoritarianism." Yeah, isn't that that's kind of a problem then. If people in your town halls are not talking about that shit, there's a problem with your constituents and with the people that attend your town halls. It says, when I read the title of the speech to Senator Kamala Harris of California on Monday after an event in Dubuque, Iowa, I guess, she responded with a simple huh. Yeah, I think, and that's not a huh with a question mark. That's a huh with a period. So I don't know if she's saying she doesn't understand it or if she's just disagreeing with it, but okay. Let's see. It says, at a CNN town hall in April, Sanders defended democratic socialism at length in response to a question from the daughter of a Soviet refugee. He distinguished his economic agenda from quote, authoritarian communism, framing his beliefs instead in the tradition of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This past Sunday on CNN again, Sanders elaborated, quote, "I think it's important for the American people to understand what my definition is of democratic socialism, and it's certainly not how Donald Trump defines it." Sanders said, adding, "When I talk about democratic socialism, it means a vibrant democracy and an economy that works for all, not just the people on top." That same sort of language linking his ideas to a tradition in the Democratic Party will be part of his speech today, according to Sanders' senior advisor, Jeff Weaver. There are a lot of democratic socialists in the Democratic Party. There are now, and there always have been, Weaver told me after looking over a final draft of the speech yesterday. Weaver said that that Sanders is planning to take on the socialism boogeyman, quote, argument directly. Let's see here. It says Sanders' inner circle is now committed to democratic socialism in a way that some senior members of his 2016 campaign team were not, though he did deliver a speech about the topic back then as well. This new speech, aides tell me, will go much deeper. Sanders said his aides see that as a moment to reach for the revolution that he's been dreaming of since he was an angry, underemployed writer in the 1970s, paying his bills through essay writing while being an activist. It's funny because a lot of people mock him for that, when in reality, a lot of people, I mean, look at me doing a fucking podcast. I mean, I'm just going on camera and trying to crowdfund and make money off of doing a podcast every week, you know? So there's nothing wrong with being an underemployed writer in the 1970s, let alone in 2019. So that's perfectly fine. But obviously all the idiot Republicans and even Democrats will mock him for that, which is sad. It says, not everyone believes the message will penetrate. There is zero electoral evidence that voters support hard socialism, which is not what he said, by the way, or care about the fights the left relitigates every day on Twitter. One frustrated former 2016 Sanders aide who spoke on the condition of anonymity to freely criticize the current campaign told me, yeah, very convenient of you. It says candidates during campaigns have to introduce their philosophies and what they believe to voters every time they run, and it's important for Bernie Sanders to run on an issue-based campaign on what he's believed for a very long time. R.A. Robin Haft Sanders' campaign chief of staff told me yesterday morning. The way to win is to make our case directly to voters and to lay this out directly to voters. His opponents' critiques line up. Sanders is promising pipe dreams that most people don't even really want and certainly won't get, and along the way he's playing right into Trump's, quote, Democrats are socialists, scare tactics, in addition to his subtler attacks on Democrats, that they always promise big but rarely deliver. The rest of the article is just quoting a couple more people that are smearing him, or, well, in this case, not just people, but Kristen Gillibrand and Michael Bennett, who are also running for president. So, yeah, I mean, it's just a typical smear piece. They quote Hickenlooper here again, the breakfast cereal guy. One more part here is quoting Jeff Weaver again. It says Sanders' aides are confident his rivals regret questioning him. Democratic socialism is morally right, but also it is imperative that we take this approach to defeat Donald Trump, Weaver told me. And then they quote Kamala Harris, says, I won't tell Senator Sanders what to do, but I am a proud Democrat and will remain that way. Okay, fine. But what issues do you agree with? That's the whole point. So see, that's the problem with these people. They just want to suck up to whatever Democratic Party coalition or constituency that they need to get votes, but it has nothing to do with focusing on issues. I mean, in the rest of the part of this article, they're quoting Gillibrand and Bennett saying like, "Oh, we just want healthcare. We want great healthcare, and we need to tackle climate change." Yeah, but how are you going to do that though? Bernie Sanders has laid out specific ways of how he's going to do that. He's talked about that in great length. He's talked about Medicare-For-All. They keep talking about how Bernie Sanders it won't lay out how he's going to pay for all these things like Medicare-For-All and Green New Deal and stuff, but he's laid it out many times. If you don't have to be an idiot to know that Bernie Sanders is obviously going to be raising taxes on the super rich, which he's going after constantly, the people he's going after constantly. So he's going to do that. He's going to be raising their taxes. He's going to be lowering the taxes of regular people. I mean, obviously, to some extent, regular people like me and you are going to have to pay higher taxes, but it's going to lead to lesser money paid. Basically like lesser, for example, like hospital bills and healthcare bills, lesser money paid for when you're, let's say if you're going to college, or you're also going to get higher wages when you're working and stuff. So, I mean, all this stuff goes to certain places. Now, if you want to talk about how you don't trust the government, handling these kind of things, then, because a lot of right-wingers say that, well, I don't trust the government to tax me and then put the tax into, put those taxes into building our roads and, building our bridges and, paying for, I guess paying for healthcare, or funding our healthcare and all that stuff. But if that was the case, then why do you support the firefighters? Why do you support police? Why do you support the military? These are all part of the government, and yet you support funding for that, but you don't support the funding for things that involve like saving people's lives. Now, I guess you could make the case that the military saves people's lives, police saves people's lives, firefighters help save people's lives, but I mean, so does healthcare, so does, higher wages, so people aren't living on the streets. So people just want to pick and choose. And, to be fair, I support the existence of firefighters. I support the existence of police, obviously ones that aren't sticking a gun in your face and killing unarmed black men and, terrorizing neighborhoods with, their bullshit fucking fascism, let alone just arresting people for no reason for petty drug crimes and stuff. Military, of course, the military, again, that's not something that shouldn't exist at all, but it definitely shouldn't be involved in the 7 or 8 countries that we're currently bombing or invading right now, let alone the fact that the government, our government is trying to start wage a war with Iran too. So that kind of stuff when it comes to when it comes to the whole concept of socialism, like they support that, but they don't like it when it's for healthcare and for all these other things. So that's very convenient. But anyway, but that's typical of right wingers and people that, shit on socialism. So I wanted to play you guys a clip of Bernie Sanders making an appearance on CNN with Anderson Cooper. And in this interview, he defends his case for democratic socialism. I think this was probably after his speech. And yeah, it is. And so let me just play this for you guys, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
In the speech today, you talk about a 21st century economic bill of rights, and you hearken back to FDR and are kind of pitching this as a continuation of FDR's legacy, even Martin Luther King Jr. Can you explain how this is pertinent to a vision of democratic socialism?
Absolutely. Back in 1944, in a little remembered State of the Union speech, it was at the end of World War II, and Roosevelt said, look, we have a Bill of Rights in this country and we have a Constitution, I'm paraphrasing him, which says that we have all kinds of great rights. We have freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, all of that is great. But what we do not have is an economic Bill of Rights. We don't guarantee a decent standard of living to all of our people. That's what he said, and he died a year later. And in fact, that mantle has never really been picked up. So what I am saying today is that are we truly free? And this is in a sense what Roosevelt was saying. If you're going out and you're working 70 or 80 hours a week because the wages you're working under are starvation wages, are you free if you can't afford to go to the doctor in the wealthiest country in the history of the world and you get sicker or maybe you die because you can't afford health insurance? Are you free if you are a young, bright person but you can't afford to go to college, or you leave school $50,000 or $100,000 in debt? Are you free if you're sleeping out on the street tonight? Anderson, 500,000 Americans, including many veterans, are sleeping out on the street tonight. So what I am saying, picking up from Roosevelt, that in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, now is the time to finally say that economic rights are human rights, that everybody in this country deserves a job at decent pay, that health care is a human right, that a full education is a human right, a clean environment is a human right, affordable housing is a human right, retirement security. We got millions of old people, senior citizens in this country, who literally cannot afford the prescription drugs they desperately need.
You are leaning into democratic socialism. Now, obviously, everybody's known you're democratic socialist, but you are clearly trying to sort of explain what your view of what that means to an American population and many people who hear the socialism part, maybe not the democratic part, and President Trump ultimately will be yelling Venezuela at you as much as possible.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the point. And the other point that I made today is that, in fact, people like Donald Trump are also socialists, except they are corporate socialists. They are prepared and do provide hundreds of billions of dollars every single year in subsidies and tax breaks to large corporations and the wealthy. Anderson, you will remember very well the Wall Street bailout. Now, Wall Street is the epitome of unfettered capitalism. That's what they believe, except when their greed and illegal behavior nearly destroyed the economy, they went begging to the Congress. They were big-time socialists, and they said, we need federal help. Give us $700 billion from the Treasury and trillions of dollars in low-interest loans from the Federal Reserve. You got the fossil fuel industry today, which is literally destroying the planet, and they get billions of dollars in subsidies and tax breaks. You have Amazon, owned by the wealthiest person in this country, Jeff Bezos, made $11 billion last year. That's what Amazon made in profits. They didn't pay a nickel in federal income taxes. So, in fact, you got Donald Trump himself, as part of his housing endeavors, received tens and tens of millions of dollars in subsidies and tax breaks. So you do have socialism in this country, except, as Martin Luther King reminded us, It's socialism for the very rich and unfettered individualism for the poor.
Talking to Senator Bernie Sanders tonight about embracing the label that President Trump and even some Democrats treat as an epithet, socialist, in his case, Democratic Socialist, which the senator today sought to weave into a progressive tapestry, as it were, tracing back to the New Deal and before. He also cited Franklin Roosevelt's open scorn for government organized by money, as FDR called it, seeming to welcome, as FDR did at the time, the attacks on him that have already begun. Here's President Trump at a Republican fundraiser in Iowa last night, painting Democrats as angry and extreme.
The Democrat Party has never been angrier. They're so angry. Did you ever see people so angry? For what? For what? These are angry people. Every day, the Democrat Party is becoming more and more unhinged and more extreme. They're going crazy. Do you love it? I sort of love it, right?
Back now with Senator Sanders. You talked today in your speech about compassion, justice, and love as sort of the hallmarks of how you see leadership and your leadership. You know how the president is going to paint your talk of democratic socialism. Besides, Venezuela, do enough Americans know what you mean by that and what that actually looks like?
Well, Anderson, that's why I'm on your show tonight.
Well, that's why I'm asking you.
Look, what we have to understand, just for example, the United States is the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a right. In many countries in Europe, Germany for one, you go to college and the cost of college is zero. I think in Finland they actually pay you to go to college. In most countries around the world, the level of income and wealth inequality, which in the United States today is worse than at any time since the 1920s, with 3 families owning more wealth than the bottom half of America, that level of income and wealth inequality is much less severe than it is right here in the United States.
But as you know, the taxes in many of those countries are much higher than they are, the individual personal taxes much higher than they are in the United States.
But I suspect that a lot of people in this country would be delighted to pay more in taxes if they had comprehensive health care as a human right. I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border. You go to the doctor anytime you want. You don't take out your wallet. You have heart surgery, you have a heart transplant, you come out of the hospital, it costs you nothing. Your kids in many countries around the world can go to public colleges and universities tuition free. Wages in many cases are higher. So there is a trade-off, but at the end of the day, I think that most people will believe they're going to be better off when their kids have educational opportunities without out-of-pocket expenses, when they have health care as a human right, when they have affordable housing, when they have decent retirement, security. I think most Americans will understand that that is a good deal.
When somebody is looking at you as a candidate, when someone is looking at Senator Elizabeth Warren as a candidate, both progressive candidates, obviously, there are now several polls that have you trailing Elizabeth Warren. It's kind of ridiculous to look at polls at this stage of a primary battle. But she does not have the label Democratic Socialist. You do. Is it a liability?
I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. Look, I mean, I certainly have known Elizabeth for many, many years, and she's a friend.
But she says she's a capitalist.
Yeah, I know. And I know many of the other candidates who are, in my view, knowing them personally, well-intentioned and decent people who want to do the right thing. But here is the point, Anderson, that I want to make. One of the reasons that so many Americans are dispirited about the political process is they hear candidates come forward and say, I want to do this, and I want to do that, and I want to do that, but nothing happens. And the reason for that is not that the candidates are lying. It is we have to deal with the reality that we don't talk about too much. And that is the power structure of America, the fact that the folks on Wall Street, in the drug companies, in the insurance companies, in the military industrial complex, in the fossil fuel industry, have so much power that no president alone, not me, not anybody else, can do it alone. And that is why I talk about us, not me, in our campaign, why I talk about a political revolution. If you want to transform our energy system and you want to combat climate change, words are not good enough. We have to bring millions of people together to tell the fossil fuel industry they will not continue to destroy this planet. You want Medicare for all? You're going to have to stand up to the insurance companies. You want to cut the cost of prescription drugs in half, which is what I think we should do? You're going to have to stand up to the incredibly wealthy and powerful pharmaceutical industry.
All right, so that's very well said, as usual, by Bernie Sanders. He makes the case for democratic socialism very well. A lot of the same things I said as far as, how other industrialized countries handle their kind of situations when it comes to education, when it comes to healthcare, higher wages and whatnot. I mean, it's very simple, man. People don't, and the thing is that the people that demand Bernie Sanders give these explanations as he's forced to, like I said, he did it in 2016, but like comparatively, when people give explanations for other things like war, like you can just give like one short little explanation, like as far as like maybe not a presidential candidate, but like politicians, they just give one little short explanation for why we should wage this war or go into this war. They could give just one little speech and and then everybody's going to accept it. But Bernie Sanders apparently has to reiterate this point repeatedly, multiple times, has to say again and again and again why democratic socialism is a good thing and why it's going to work for the country. And people are just so scared of that socialism buzzword. And let me just say something regarding that. When it comes to that whole fear of like, putting that label on Bernie and, how Democrats are going to have to fight against, somebody being a socialist. Oh my God, how is anybody going to, vote for this person when they call themselves a socialist? But in reality, I mean, listen, not only every Democrat has been like even Bernie said it. I think in the when I was reading the article that was discussing his speech, they quoted him as saying like every politician since God knows who, I think Bill Clinton, JFK or something. These people and those JFK. I don't know about JFK. I don't know very much about JFK, but Bill Clinton definitely was not a socialist. But even he was called a socialist, Even Barack Obama, as many know, he was called a socialist, communist, whatever. People went crazy about that kind of label, on multiple different kinds of candidates. So when these people say like, oh my God, we're so scared that our Democratic candidate, let's say if it is Bernie Sanders, is going to be called a socialist and it's going to keep people from voting for him. But it doesn't matter. They already use that label with everybody. And that's the second part is that when people actually hear the policies, it's going to be home run. It's going to be a home run for that candidate. In this case, Bernie Sanders, since no other candidate is making obviously the same type of arguments as Bernie is, at least as strong as Bernie is, and in the best ways Bernie can, because obviously everybody else's policies that they're pushing for, everything else that like all the other, like Elizabeth Warren, Kirsten Gillibrand, I don't know, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, all these other people are pushing for a watered down version, or just not at all pushing for, but many times a watered down version of what Bernie Sanders, is advocating for. And many of those things that they're pushing for, they're not even pushing like for them like 100%. They're just like, oh, it's watered down, but it's also like they barely ever like get into the details of it. Whereas when you hear Bernie Sanders is always getting into the details of what democratic socialism is and how he believes in these specific policies, not just worrying about the fucking label. He's worried about the specifics of the policies. And Bernie Sanders is all about policies. He cares about the policy. He doesn't care about the label. So if he's gonna go out there, he's got to name it something, right? So if he calls it democratic socialism, that's fine. And like I said before, a lot of the people in other countries hear these kind of policies. They hear democratic socialism, they like it. But then when they hear the policies, they definitely like it a hell of a lot more. So it's not just about the label. When they hear the label, okay, great. But then they hear the policies, like, wow, that's a really, that's a good deal, that's something that I want. That's a country I want to live in, So the more people that I just believe that the more people that hear about about democratic socialism and the ideas that are behind it, the more they're going to support it. And Bernie Sanders might not be the perfect candidate, but when it comes to pushing for something that a lot of other candidates, if not all the candidates, aren't pushing for, majority of them at least, are not pushing for, he's the only one that's doing what the other ones are not doing. And That's what makes him better, a hell of a lot better than all of them. And if you're going to ultimately, you're going to go and support somebody that, you're going to go and support somebody that is going to help you and help your loved ones and help you live a better life, especially when you're just a regular Joe and a regular Jane out there. Bernie Sanders is the person you need to honestly try and understand him better, instead of just hearing all the pundits in the media and all the other candidates and politicians, kind of just making up things about him and characterizing him as something he isn't, which is majority of the time just bullshit. And it's just like, catering to idiots and just strawmanning him out of nowhere.